On today's Encrypted Economy, we talked to Dylan Dewdney. He's the co-founder of NFT3 and the Kylan Network, which we actually don't get to. Maybe that'll be a different podcast. We explore at a very high level today what bringing your ID to Web 3.0 will look like and NFT3's minimal viable product to get that started. Now, this notion of portable identifier has been around for years. It predates Bitcoin. It hasn't been tied to Web 3, or has it? When we had Dr. Harjano on a number of episodes ago, he spoke about how it was an early design decision for the internet not to go down the road of Web 3.0. And certainly he would know. A decision was made at the time that having the originator bring all that data with them would impede performance. So instead of it coming with the user, it would reside the destination. And that was effectively the initial architecture. Of course, back then, performance and scalability were critical concerns, more so even than today. But this concept of decentralized identity is still in its early days, despite the fact that it's been around for like 10 to 15 years, maybe even before. How do you verify? How do you get people to even care or to start to use this stuff? Even with performance largely solved for, or maybe it's not, people who use the internet are kind of addicted to not focusing too much on their security or their privacy or what they are giving up in order to have free tools. And what's going to change? But this is much beyond that now, because one thing that does change is pain. Just like there's been a rush of attention, even more recently in crypto, regarding both commercial establishments and individuals to things like phishing and spoofing, which leads to rug pulls and identity theft. There's a large adjustment that's going on now, of course, that impacts people's funds and their things that they worked for or earned. So there are a number of things in the digital asset community and beyond, obviously, that can be accomplished trustlessly, right? Without trust, zero knowledge proofs, encryption, all those types of things. But of course, we can't get away from trust. Sometimes it's critical and there's no substitute for it. So a framework of trust will be critical for Web 3.0 to be successful. NFT3 incorporates principles of staking and building that trust with a social media verification into their solution. So with that, I bring you Dylan Dewdney, co-founder of NFT3 and the decentralized identity platform. I think you're going to like it. Welcome to the Encrypted Economy, a weekly podcast featuring discussions exploring the business, laws, regulation, security, and technologies relating to digital assets and data. I am Eric Hess, founder of Hess Legal Counsel. I've spent decades representing regulated exchanges, broker-dealers, investment advisors, and all matter of fintech companies for all things touching electronic trading with a focus on new and developing technologies. So this is Eric Hess with the Encrypted Economy, and today we have Dylan Dewdney. Now, Dylan's in a lot of different things. So, and we were talking about his title before we started, and it's sort of like, other than being a co-founder of Kylan Network as well as NFT3, lead initiator, grand poobah, master of something, all that works for him. He's not particularly spun up on it, but he is obviously deep in the weeds. As a founder, obviously driving the products forward. So, Dylan, welcome to the show, whatever your title is.
Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Excellent. So today we're going to start off focusing primarily on the work with NFT3 and the issues associated with decentralized identity. But before we do all of that, let's start with your background.
Oh, okay. So yeah,
I took you off guard.
There's nothing people like to talk about more than themselves.
That's right.
I think that was something that was taught to me in some sort of, I forget what the job was, but it was like a sales job, and they were like, hey, if you want to get people talking, ask them about themselves. And it's true. It's true for the most part. People really do like to talk about themselves. So thank you.
And what do you like the most about yourself while we're on it? No, just kidding. Keep going.
I feel like I'm in a session with my therapist right now. So yeah, I guess I'll just try to pull out some of the more relevant features of my background for sort of the crypto universe. And I first got into ideas about, well, first of all, I'm really, really curious. I've always been super curious, and not the kind of curious that's like, hey, like, let's, I wonder about that. It's like, I really want to like wrestle with things, and try to truly understand them. And I'm always sort of going, I'm always trying to reach, uh, toward things that I'm not even capable of. So so I have that. That's a bit of a character trait for me. And then eventually, I hopefully I get a sense of things after 10 years in crypto, roughly a little more than that. But I feel like I've got a slight sense for things, but they're changing so fast all the time.
Yep.
I had an academic background, really. I guess I initially approached a lot of this, my like kind of how it was primed for Bitcoin in the very, very early days, which when I seriously started getting into it was late 2011. And I was primed for it because I was really interested in ideas about, how society changes over time, particularly through the intersection of technologies and social movements, or just more broadly, like how does society evolve and iterate? Right now, we're in this interesting thing, like situation that we had never had before, which is we have access to all knowledge all the time. Like that shouldn't be understated or estimated, and we take it for granted. We're watching, um, we humanity typically is going to like the lowest common denominator, given this Promethean fire of that knowing everything at all times, and nevertheless we're looking up like cat videos. Nothing wrong
Yeah.
with cat videos, but so yeah, that's uh, so I was kind of primed for that because I was doing my master's in sociology, and that was gave me this really good comprehensive kind of like background, and I was into this. I was part of that. Part of my study with it, I was really curious about, at the time. This was actually before 2011. This was 2008 or 2009. There was a game called, and this was also during the rise of porgs, and there was a game called
What? Sorry.
massive multiplayer online role-playing games.
Oh,
So
okay.
this was like World of Warcraft was just coming into its own. Eve Online was just coming into its own, and these in-game economies started developing. And this was actually like extremely interesting for me because I had this sort of idea that we're going to start living a lot more of our lives online to that extent. We're going to echo and parallel all of the value systems we have in real life online, right? Um, and the problem with that, though, at least pre-Bitcoin and pre-blockchain, is we had no value transfer layer for the internet, right? Like there's no way to really um, kind of buy and sell and trade, value effortlessly or without, massive intermediary friction. And then, Bitcoin came along. And so I was actually at high conviction around Bitcoin during the same time, in the early days that it was sort of like if you said you were into Bitcoin, it was like saying you were into pornography. Like it was sort of like there was a social stigma attached to it. A lot of people don't appreciate this. And this is why I have so much respect for people who have been in it, especially like, pre 2013, pre 2017 particularly, but even before that, because they were sort of shouting into the wind, like, hey, like this is important, even when nobody knew what the hell they were talking about, and if they did, they thought that they were shady, quite truly. So people in the early days, I have a high amount of respect for, and to some extent, some self-respect. But I wasn't quite as vocal as some of those people, so I can't lay claim to that. So I'm in Toronto, and I got involved pretty early on with the Ethereum team, and just some of the team members. But I also was part of their ICO, and that sort of, and I was like a permabull for Ethereum all the way to the top in 2017. And that's when things really changed. And I started sort of not going from the outside in and starting to go from the inside out and trying to work on different ideas and concepts to maybe to bring to market, to work to some extent consulting with different VCs, blah, blah, blah. And eventually it led to a lot of failures and some successes. But as time went on from 2017 to now, I just really started building my own awareness of what was possible and my own network of people that I knew. And and I got involved in investing and in building teams and designing go-to-market plans for a number of projects, advising a number of projects. Just kind of progressively got to where we're at now.
So why don't we shift into getting into decentralized identity? What is an identity NFT?
Yeah, so the decentralized identifier standard has been developed in earnest over the last roughly 6 years or so, and presented in various working groups, and eventually rolled its way up to just because of its validity as a technology for decentralized identity, rolled its way up to the World Wide Web Consortium by last year and was approved as a standard by them. And if you are aware of the W3C, they are the body that approves things like HTTPS. I think, in fact, their last approved standard was HTTPS. And this, I think, kind of lets people know how important DIDs are. So, if anybody was wondering, where the internet, how the internet was sort of quasi-governed, it's not in like some dark room in the middle of a mountain. It's like, a bunch of people getting together at the W3C, and it's a consortium of people that approve these standards. So the reason why it's important as a standard is because it satisfies all of the functions that you would want for an identity standard. So it's able to move seamlessly as a method between different contexts, whether we're talking about Web 2 or Web 3. It satisfies the function of being able to have a common referent to each decentralized identifier that's created. You are able to use a variety of DID methods, right? So there are a bunch of DID methods, 95 right now, that are out there, and I kind of liken the DID standard to, if listeners are familiar with ERC, which I assume they are. It's sort of like the development of ERC standards in 2015, 16, 17, and even to today, where eventually some of these standards become dominant, despite there being a multitude of them, and they become dominant typically through their adoption or their use in things that people use. So the goal for NFT3 is for us to have a DID method similar to like ERC 20 or 751 or 721. Sorry, and for us to have a dominant DID method through the use of our DID method, and the only way we can see to do that is through making it productized and giving something people to do. But in terms of the technology itself, it's like, I don't want to say it's simple, but the idea behind it is relatively simple. So you start with a DID method, and you end up, you create a DID method, which is just a unique identifier. And then you create you have a DID method, and then through that you can create a decentralized identifier according to that DID method.
And so the methods, the DID methods to date, there's been talk about DIDs for years. I mean, I remember going back 10 years, 15 years even, talking about this, and like a lot of people working for free trying to put this standard together. And then there were different groups of people doing different standards. And it just seemed well-intentioned, but God, it just seemed like there was just way too many efforts going on at the time. And none of them really seemed to kind of coalesce. To your point, they didn't attempt to, I guess, engage the community. It was like this was a standard. They expected people to do it. But why didn't those previous standards, why didn't they take off? I mean, isn't there, you know, isn't somebody who's engaging online, isn't it in their interest to think in terms of, hey, how do I port it? Was it the lack of Web3 capabilities that didn't drive it? Like, why is it taking so long?
That's a really great question because decentralized. I, I, I mean, I'll sort of like divorce myself from the standpoint of it being not like completely mature and being a little bit in flux, But I mean, basic did standards. You're right, have been sort of like conceptualized and thought about for some time. Um, and I think that part of the reason is that there wasn't really much incentive for people to adopt a standard, right? It's similar to many systems. Like you need to have where you're trying to get a standard developed. Why would everybody do it? There has to be some sort of incentive to doing it. And I'm thinking, and I think about the development of intermodal shipping and cargo containers in this respect, right? Like it wasn't until there was like very, very clear incentives and efficiencies gained through globalized systems of production and manufacturing that intermodal like cargo shipping became a thing, right? Being able to like have Lego block cargo shipping thing, like a lot of people take that for granted, but it's like extremely important. But it wasn't until we had really, really broad systems of trade and global manufacturing production that it became a thing because, well, why would you need to have some super efficient global system when you're typically going to like local and regional markets or blah blah blah, right? um, Similar to that, you need a really kind of like broad context and system of incentives for this stuff to develop and sort of like uh, a very good foundation, right? For standards to develop. And so I think for DIDs, we're at that point where we have a good foundation because we have this sort of, I would say, imminent kind of evolution of Web 2 to Web 3 and this sort of P2P orientation and this idea like everybody's sort of looking around at all the metaverses and they're like, how do I how do I how do I let people know who I am in Metaverse 1 versus Metaverse 2 or in this L1 metaverse versus this L1 metaverse or blah 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 or this Dex or this sex, like we're going to need to have a common referent to the experience of living in Web3. Like that's what it just sort of like comes down to. And that timing is very imminent right now, in my opinion. So I think that this is a great time to see if we can create a product that people use, and decentralized identity is just sort of slipped in the back door. So our strategy, we're doing something very relatively like narrow, which is we just want to solve like to some extent validated airdropping. We want to be able to for projects to airdrop to real users, and we want our through NFT3, they'll have much higher assurance that they're airdropping to real users, and vice versa. I'm going to go through the friction of creating an NFT3 account because I'm going to get access to presumably more airdrops or blah, blah, blah. So our sort of tagline is like, come, at least initially for our MVP is like, come for the airdrops, stay for like the decentralized identity revolution. Um, but but we need to like sneak it in the back door a little bit still. I don't, although people are awakening to it more and more because the timing is right. So yeah, I think to be more succinct, I think it's a lot about timing.
And so the validation model or the staking model is different than a liveness model, right? Or maybe you could say it is the same as liveness, but the verification of liveness, something like maybe, validates a person, a human, right? In this case, it's validated
Hmm.
via staking. How would you like? What do you think the pros and cons and potential use cases for each are? If
Well, the con for sorry, go ahead if there's a follow
no,
up.
we'll start with that.
Oh, I'll start with the con. I think one of the biggest cons to a staking model, if that is in fact the only kind of parameter that you're going to use for realness, is that it's it can be spoofed
Yep.
easily in a sense, right? Like so I don't think that, and nor will we use staking as a primary method to kind of say like, hey, anybody who has an NFT3 account is likely to be real because of the staking aspect of
Right.
it.
Doesn't have the Sybil
But
resistance,
I
right?
but precisely, and I think that, but what it does do, a pro of it, is it allows I guess I call both a punishment and reward vector, right? So in our model, we have built, I think not arbitrarily, but it's under, I think it's under discovery what will be the best things that we use to formulate like a reputational score. But in terms of it being on-chain information, um, will our participants be able to sort of buffer their reputational score by staking extra ISME token? Yes. Will they be able to buffer it some tremendous amount? No, that would be a bad thing because uh,
Good answer.
you would have people using, right. But yes, you want it to have some utility and use. And the other thing is about staking, about having some value staked within the NFT3 account and to someone's map to someone's decentralized identifier, is that you also provide a vector for punishment. So punishments are really important in that sense too, because if you can't really like you can't do anything unless there's something for someone to lose, or to maybe not lose, but some some action that can be taken through, this wouldn't be centralized, by the way, through arbitration, right? um, that would mean that somebody gets some loss of benefit or something like that, right? Like if there's evidence of behavior that is deleterious to the network or just not cool, or if there's some way we can prove that this NFT3 account is basically a spoof, right? In some way, shape, or form, we need to be able to have people need to be able to have something to lose. Does that make
That makes
sense?
sense. And what about
Um,
liveness in that case? In other words, so we have the staking component, which means that you have to put something up, and so that limits, the army of bots potentially, unless the army of bots has a ton of money. But then there's a validation or a reputation component to it, which is, I guess,
mhm.
validated, which is, I guess, something I want to kind of ask about. And then there's also the punishment side of it. Although, so there's two questions in one here. One was the validation component of it, but then also on the punishment side of it, isn't there sort of an interim, a midway point, meaning punishing if, hey, we know this is, a bot, but there could also be reduced benefits or even some negatives associated with not providing some level of ongoing verification.
Yeah, I think that's a good insight, in fact, and maybe we'll use it. Um, but,
I have to use my NFT3 to get my airdrop though, right? Um,
yes. Um, so I think, yeah, I'm just trying to like rewind back to the first part of the question in my head, but
Which is a
Like,
reputational verification component, because the staking
right.
provides one aspect, and you rightfully pointed out that's not enough, right? And there needs to be some sort of reputation validation, whether it's a social media account or otherwise. And I'm just kind of interested in how you envision that piece. How does that work?
Yeah. So I actually, as time goes on, we want the ability to uh, put more things into the did backpack. Okay, so or into the did house, right? So if you first buy a house, it's like any other house. It's indistinguishable. In fact, it may not even be a house. It may be a set piece for a house, and you can't tell from the outside if it's a real house or not. As time goes on, you live in the house, you wear down the carpet, you bring things into it, you blah blah blah, right? You
Right.
do a lot of things.
You're like, Eric, let me
So
get
the
my
idea is
MVP out, right?
right, yeah. So I actually think that I actually think that and in terms of when we're talking about liveness detection and different, like, which is sort of like liveness is a bit of the standard now to some extent, or an additional standard when it comes to KYCing. And we do this through static liveness tests by holding up a thing that says the date and a unique identifier, if you're on a sex or something like that. But we also do like dynamic liveness tests in different situations too. Um, Now, one of the problems of liveness is there, the ability to spoof is there, like, or fraudulently provide a liveness test or to game it. Like the advancements right now in deep faking, I think actually provide a lot of issues for liveness testing. Although, and I think that the access to that type of technology will become more pervasive and cheap. And so I think liveness tests may have some work cut out for them in the future, maybe, maybe not. But I think and also, that sort of like static level of KYCing also has some problems associated with it. I think it's good, by the way. It's one of the best ways to prove realness. Um, but I think as time goes on, and this is my hope, that we will use, and I hope it's us, but we will use decentralized identifiers as this basic, as the house, right? And living in the house is proving the realness, because you can't fake, over time, all these different things and attestations, on-chain interactions, different social graphs, all mapped to a decentralized identifier, right? um, and I think that that's kind of like the key insight about this, is that you can use it as a almost inviolable measure of realness and identity in a Web3 world, and it will be extremely resistant, if not total, like almost totally resistant, if done the right way, to bot spoofing or any type of fraudulent situation. In the same way that like in the same way that the massive weight of all of the previous proofs of the Bitcoin network and Ethereum, right? Like that massive weight that's there that you would have to surmount to to um, to basically reconstitute the entire chain and then provide a fake um, proof, right? And I think that that's like the same thing that could exist for decentralized identifiers. People will build massive weight into their decentralized identifiers that would be almost impossible to fake, right?
Right. And I guess the validation component of that has to be managed over time, and
It's exactly.
and also stolen identity is a big one. Obviously somebody has a
Mm-hmm.
great identifier and it gets stolen because they're not maintaining it, then it's a little bit dangerous. I while you were talking, and I'll just share this, years ago, God, it's a while ago. Um, I was talking to a manufacturer who basically had your mobile phone the way that you hold your mobile phone, the way that it sits on you during the day, the activity that your mobile phone goes through on a daily basis, and even the way that you type in, the way that you interact with your fingers on the phone, all of those create sort of a very unique fingerprint that over time sort of converges into almost like a meme that's very unique to you. And that
Mm.
the rotate, like it basically was something that was loaded on the phone, and it was an algorithm, and it calculated all these things during the day, and that was used to identify you. I always wondered, like, what happened if you went to like a bouncy gym or something for the day, like what would happen to that identifier. I was like, well, like that's not the guy, but maybe then there's something different. But it was just very intriguing that the phone itself, just without even revealing any information about you, was so tied to you, had sort of, the phone itself had a journey during the day, that the phone, your mobile device, experienced certain things that was very much, had more points on it. Well, I don't, they were comparing it to a fingerprint in its complexity, because there's so
Hmm.
many different points across the day. And they would obviously find a way to manage out the bouncy gym, because most people aren't going to spend 12 hours in a bouncy gym or doing something like skydiving, right? But anyway, just it's intriguing because it's there's an ongoing verification component to it, and then there's, and how do you manage that? What is the validation for that versus the one and done, where potentially that alone might be used to establish, but on an ongoing basis, if you don't have sort of a way of recurring validation, then you could very much end up in stolen identity situations.
Yeah, and it's a great, it's a great comparison, right? And I guess it's a great comparison because it's sort of it's the same idea in the sense that over time you are kind of like you have this unique accrual of different characteristics and things that you do that end up really proving to some extent your uniqueness as a human in that example. The difference in that example, I think, as opposed to what we envision in the future happening, is that in that example, that unique identifier, that that whatever the distillate is of all of those parameters, ends up being custodied by your cell phone company, right? In this, and is rolling into their unique identifier for you that they've created. Um, and in the milieu that will be Web3 and decentralized identity, we firmly believe that that's going to be under your control. That exposes us to new things we need to get used to, and new risks, right? So you can't go to your cell phone company if you can't go to, like, necessarily the identity police, the decentralized identity police per se. And if you lose your private keys or your seed phrase to access your NFT3 account, it's very similar to wallet hygiene. I call it our crypto hygiene. I would call it, you need good crypto hygiene, good Web3 hygiene. um, but uh, but you get these new efficiencies as a result of taking a little bit more responsibility over this stuff. I think we do have a social recovery process that we're engineering, where if you were to lose access to your if you were to lose access to your NFT3 account, we can get in touch with your the people that you've linked into as part of your social recovery, and see if we can get them to sign off on reinstating. Um, and I think that's important to do, because it gives people a little bit more confidence. But something that might be provocative to people, to in terms of NFT3 and how we approach this idea of identity. Well, we kind of think about your ability to create a pseudonymous identity or anonymous reputation through this decentralized identifier. That's yours, and if you want to give it to someone, if you want to sell it on the open market as time goes on, that's okay too. And you might say, "Whoa, wait! You told us that this NFT3 is going to be, these are going to be real identities, good people. And the answer is yes, because we can still do that. And how we do that is we can essentially attach, sort of, if you will, like badging to know that if this NFT3 account is a Genesis account, right? As opposed to if it's been bought and sold, multiple times. That will affect the market will dictate what that means. But I assume that will probably take down the reputational patina, if you will, of an NFT3 account if it's not a Genesis account. And if somebody gets something stolen, so these are things to consider. But we actually do want them to be transferable.
Yeah, I mean, there could be different levels of what you can do. Like, you can
Yeah.
you can maybe pick up an identity, somebody else's NFT and get an airdrop. But if you ultimately want to use that to buy a home or to take out a loan, then the verification score would probably have to be. I'll call it I'm sure you have another name for it, but the weighting that you
Yeah.
associated with that is going to have to be higher, which I guess gets into end credit, which is on the horizon too. So maybe we talk a little bit about end credit. What's end credit?
So yeah, end credit was kind of like a section of the white paper that we developed more deeply because we wanted to really appeal to this idea of a use case around, or at least, sorry, the ability to drive the discovery or implementation of under collateralized loan arrangements within crypto. So right now, all of our kind of DeFi stuff is all based on over collateralized loan arrangements, which you need because you don't know who you're working with, and you don't know if they can come up with the dosh to cover their bases. And but that kind of like is not evocative of the point, or isn't it in the spirit of the whole point of loans in the first place? Like, right? Like if I had the money to do it,
Yeah.
I wouldn't need the loan.
Right.
So, this is why we get loans in real life, because we don't have the money. But, and loaners and banks, are willing to do this because we have they're great because of the sample size, but we have great ways of understanding credit risk and worthiness. Because the sample sizes are so large, we can get a good sense of credit risk and worthiness through the actuarial science behind it. But the actual indicators of credit risk and worthiness that are used, or variables of credit risk and worthiness, are actually like not that great. They're actually sort of terrible, but it works because we have huge sample sizes to work with. Now, it's kind of the opposite. We actually have pretty good ways of understanding credit risk and worthiness, but our sample sizes are tiny, and the people are also sort of like anonymous. So, what if we had a better way to assess, credit risk and worthiness through understanding the weighting of different characteristics or indicators of a person's on-chain wallet information. So, for example, if they have 1,000 Ethereum, is that's going to help if I want to give them a loan. If they never seem to have engaged in any wash trading, or if they hold, or if they transact a lot, or blah blah blah. There are a number of different. I think we have 5 different parameters associated with different weights, and this is under discovery to some extent. These, in terms of what the formula is that ends up spitting out, an end credit score. But yeah, and if we can attach KYC attestations, that should increase the score a little bit. If we can attach, if their social graphing is complete, maybe that increases the score a little bit. Or if they have some sort of a maybe there's maybe there are really worthy attestations that can be done, right? Like give you a mark of approval by XYZ, and this is important. And then additionally, if they are willing to stake certain amounts of ISME, we can buffer them up in their credit scoring to some extent. Now, will this be the sine qua non reputational score that will end up realizing the discovery of under collateralized loans and a new vistas and billions of dollars of um, new products, financial products being developed in crypto? We hope so, but it'll be a couple of years, I think, before at the application layer, or where people will say, okay, like, yeah, we can depend on these scores to some extent. Like we can kind of depend on this, and this makes sense. And it'll start with instead of 200%, we'll go down to 110, and then we'll go down to, oh, my tolerance is 105%, over collateralized, and then we'll get to 100%, and then we'll go for a little while and be like, well, this is okay, this is working, and then when we get to 99%, we've hit under collateralized loan arrangement, and now potentially the world's your oyster as you get more data on the risks associated based on their scoring, right? And that's how it'll all go down, and at least that's how we think it'll all go down.
Yeah, and I guess over time it could also mitigate AML, KYC obligations when you're onboarding. I mean, some of that information, if you could, just like ZKP or something to that effect, then you don't have to provide it, which would be a big time saver or grease saver, because a lot of people today, you're just constantly turning over your personal identifiable information again and again if you're onboarding to like a CEX or something, CEX, centralized exchange.
Oh yeah. It's good to delineate in a podcast what you're talking about for that acronym.
You used it before. I was like thinking some people might be like, "What did he just say?"
Sex.
But anyway.
That's sex. It's funny when there's a lot of jokes in there, but it's annoying, right? Like, it's super annoying to have to do it every time. It's also sort of intrusive. It's like, do I want to, do this? Like,
Yep.
They're custodying that. It'd be much better if you had, maybe like a KYC provider that you've done an attestation with. You provide that proof of attestation. It's referencing back to your decentralized identifier, and you sign off on your DID when you sign up, and that carries the proof of attestation. That would be way nicer. And I think that there's a minimum level of like KYCing that can travel across so many different centralized exchanges and contexts, right? The other thing, though, is to consider is with DEXs, like, DEXs don't necessarily, like, they don't necessarily care if there's wash trading, like, because it kind of makes them look better, right? But I think eventually they will care, and so it's an ecosystem level thing. If they can point to having a bunch of real users because they're all, they've signed off their DIDs as a point of signing into the DEX or connecting their wallet, right? Then that's actually like of high value to the entire ecosystem and the market, and you can separate a lot of wheat from chaff, right?
Right. It also facilitates DEXs being embraced more by regulators in the U.S. and elsewhere.
Yep, exactly, right? If a DEX can say, well, because some of this stuff comes down to like legal conversations between people, and there's like, well, we want you to like, I mean, you can't. It's hard to shut down DEXs, but like,
Yep.
I mean,
100%.
Regulators we shouldn't underestimate them, and we shouldn't underestimate the ability of different governments to lock stuff down.
So Is that espresso or is that coffee? That's a small mug. It's
I'm
small.
I'm just I'm a giant.
You must be a giant.
I'm
Is that
seven.
regular?
I'm 7'8".
Here's mine.
I'm just kidding.
It's almost the size of my
No, it's
head.
espresso.
Oh, it's an
It's
espresso.
espresso.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, but we digress. That stays in though. Dylan Dewdney is an espresso drinker. But anyway, the question was, we talked a little bit about reputation, and the staking model. And I guess my question is, on the reputation side, we talked about linking to social accounts. What is sort of the initial go live vision, and then subsequent to that, how do you envision the validators acting with regard to reputation monitoring?
So, so the MVP itself is going to be pretty. It's like most MVPs. It's going to be narrow and limited and easy to accomplish. And for us, that means a one-to-one mapping of the wallet with a DID. As time goes on, and it's an Ethereum-based wallet. As time goes on, and by the way, wallet is a terrible term for what these are because nothing is actually held in the wallet. It's just a way to organize your keys. But anyway, that's a whole nother story. But we'll call it a wallet because it's the best thing we have right now. Um, but yeah, we would do a one-to-one mapping of an Ethereum-based wallet with a DID. As time goes on, we'll do higher than that. So I think we would map multiple wallets to a single DID. But for right now, it's one-to-one. And you would have linkages through OAuth with different social media profiles, and that's how that would work. Um, and for us, that's I'm pretty sure we're centered in on Twitter and LinkedIn for the two that you need, and then you stake a certain amount of ISME token, not so much that it's like, oh my god, I don't want to have to do this to be able to activate my DID, but not so little that it's not meaningful. Um, and those are the initial parameters. As time goes on, I think the second parameter will be and sorry, I should back up. Through all of that and some analysis of their on-chain information, will formulate an initial sort of reputational score. And this is under discovery. It may not be right. It may not be the right formulation, or it may change over time, or we may change the formulation. But we'll spit out a reputational kind of score for this. And then the next sort of area we'll cover is a parameter associated with reputation, I think, is KYC. And leave this up to the individual. If they want to do it, fine. If they don't, also fine. But we would be presumably partnering with a KYC provider. Maybe, I'll probably reach out to Fractal or Synapse. I know both those teams pretty well, and see if they want to, if they want to jump onto the DID bandwagon, and experiment a bit. And so the idea would be to have them integrate with them and have them, do the KYC, these KYC processes with the individuals. But when the individuals sign up as part of the KYC process, they would provide their NFT3 DID, right? So that we can attach. Now we know that upon sign up, this person provided their NFT3 DID, they signed off on it, and now we can say this handshake happened, right? And they can say we provided the proof of, and here's the proof of the attestation. This is which is a verifiable credential. Here's the VC of, whatever 0x blah 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 provided their proof of attestation, and this is their KYC. That would be the second parameter I think we'll probably move to. Then after that, I think we're going to start thinking through, and this is a much bigger kind of like, I think, engineering task, which is how do we start figuring out what are the like what type of data is really interesting to consider when it comes to, and how will we kind of like polish it and understand it when it comes to like on like in within like in-game interactions or like if I swing a sword 1,000 times, like we'll need, Metaverse One to provide a verifiable credential or proof of attestation of swinging a sword 1,000 times. And then, what I don't know what that will mean, and how we're going to assess the reputational score associated with it, but I know that it's going to be meaningful, right? So yeah, that's the best I can do right now.
Well, that's pretty good. I mean, you walk then you run, right? Like when
Yeah.
I was talking with Charged Particles, I had all these ideas, and they're like, "Hey, we're still trying to like work through we're trying to work through what we got right now." And a lot of people like have a lot of vision for where the metaverse and all these different things are going to go, but it still has to be built and it still has to be tested, and that's a process in and of itself. It starts with the first creation, which is in the mind, but you still have to do it in actuality. Looking forward a bit, you know, the notion of Web3 and the user having their own, basically collecting the different reputational components or what they've done in particular metaverses and bringing it from metaverse to metaverse, or Web3 application to Web3 application. There's a lot of talk about what changes between the Web2 overlords and the Web3 overlords, right? There's some people are sort of cynical about what actually happens, and just wanted to sort of flesh this idea out a little bit, because one thing that a lot of the purists forget with Web2 is that everybody gave Web2 the power over their identity. I was in cybersecurity, a little different, but in cybersecurity, and I forget, one of my clients came to me and said, like, and he was a hedge fund guy, and he was like sending out like these financial reports out to people on Gmail. That probably wouldn't happen as much today. But it was something that he had used, he was comfortable with, he had a personal relationship, he didn't want to make it all worky, so he kind of like, usually it's the CEO who screws things up the most, right? Because they don't like, oh, those rules don't apply to me, right? and they're the ones peddling the most. And basically somebody hacked into it, and he was telling me the story. This is just a funny one. He said he thinks that whatever the hacking was involved a crunching sound as they took his data. It sounded like chewing. I don't know.
Interesting.
Whatever. Or maybe that was just psychosomatic. I don't know. But basically, he heard this chewing, and then he couldn't find his emails were gone. And so he reached out to Google, and he was put on sort of like a chat board or something like that. And he was just like, well, what can we do? And I'm like, well, hold it. Let's just break this down. I didn't say this, but in different terms. You use Gmail for free. Now you want super service. How does that connect? And in many ways, like we go on Facebook and we say,
Mm-hmm.
oh, they're creating these avatars of us. It's so terrible. But by the same token, we expect to go on Facebook and have this all delivered to us for nothing. So, and
Mm-hmm.
so now the bridge to Web3 is, as we're going across sites, you might have your Web3 overlords, particularly communities that people really want to get into, and saying, you know what, in order to give you access to this beautiful kingdom for free or close to free, you need to give us access to some of that data you have in your nice juicy wallet. And what are your thoughts about that dynamic? Is it a chance to shift the overlords and sort of rethink what our power is with regard to those? And again, overlords, I know I'm being a little dramatic, but is it a chance to rethink the power dynamic with respect to them? Like, what are your thoughts in terms of the evolution? Because the desire to aggregate and to market into and to leverage that data isn't going away. And the models, once they're in sync, there's still going to be tremendous value in understanding how people are moving across platforms now versus even just your own platform itself.
Yeah. There's always, I, this sounds, except maybe love between people, there's typically always, or self-love, there's always a cost. And I think that the cost of the lives we live in the context of Web 2 has been that our lives have been used as raw material. And when I say our lives, I mean what we do on the internet has a bunch of value. And that has been captured by platforms, right? Fan companies, and good on them, because it's great, man, because we get a lot of great products and results out of this, right? Like, we can interact with friends, we can have a whole suite of software that we use that is completely free.
And back to what you were saying initially, all this knowledge is online, even if we just look at kitten videos.
Yeah, like Web 1, or if you want to call it 0.5, is actually like was very decentralized. But the problem was there wasn't great UX UI for the internet, and meant these companies didn't change technical infrastructure. They built great UXs and UIs and interesting, software for the internet, and that's what we used. Anyway, but I think that the change from Web 2 now to Web 3, and whether that's actually going to be meaningful, which I think is at the heart of your question, I think that we can think about that change as so I had a meeting, believe it or not, like, legacy companies are really interested in decentralized identities. So I've been reached out to. And in this meeting, it was Samsung. And, one of the guys that was in the meeting, technically oriented, he's like, so it's like cookies, but you control the cookies, basically, right? And I'm like, yeah, it's kind of like that. And I think that
my cookies versus your cookies, right?
And yeah, I think that is Web 3 versus Web 2. My cookies versus your cookies, because now you have the referent material is now endogenous to you, controlled by you, custodied by you. It gives you more risk. You could lose it, right? You can never get it back, potentially. But now it's controlled by you. So if you in the context of sharing, information, I think you're totally on the nose, right on the money when you're talking about the idea that the customer service oriented, you're always going to be providing, there's always going to be people taking part in something, and therefore you will need to, they also want to share information. Sometimes that gets lost. I want you to know that I'm a big deal. That's precisely why I'm creating a DID. Right. So, and you vice versa want to have some insight into me. Now, on-chain information is interesting because it's public, for the most part, unless you're working with, ZKs or whatever. But yeah, I mean, you can decide whether or not you want to share that information. You can click a button, say, XYZ platform DAO DEX wants to have access to all of your anything associated with your DID, right? And you can say yes or no. And you can click a button that says yes or no. And it's going to be the same process like that, or similar, but it's just going to be less less opaque than what happens today. It's going to be more, I think there's going to be a lot more popular support and governmental support for these types of technologies, because they are not as rapacious to the individual, and the difference, I think, is going to be more value will be captured by individuals rather than by companies. Does this mean, and I think there's going to be way bigger market efficiencies under discovery, right? There's so much billions of dollars are wasted on the basic inefficiency of, bots, right? And advertising models and supply side, like, and buy side, blah blah blah. All the I mean, advertising is a basic business model of the internet, and you don't know whether it's real eyes you're getting to or not. Like, that's a problem. So,
Yeah.
this problem could be solved, and so many efficiencies could be created as a result. And yeah, I think you're right on the money. It doesn't the orientation of DAOs, sort of, or DEXs or whatever, people wanting to having communities and wanting to know about people in your community, vice versa, you wanting them being able to leverage this data, this information, that will not go away. In fact, it may even intensify. But the difference, I think, is that we have the capacity now to have, if we do have a decentralized identity layer, to have that common reference. So you have that technical layer where you have a common referent, and this value capture can get back to the individual. There's going to still be some I don't want to call it rent seeking, but if there's going to be some amount of cut, right? Like, if 100% of your value is now being captured by FANG companies living your life in Web 2, maybe, only 10 to 20% of your value is going to be captured. And the only reason why is because you may want to make that process easier for yourself. There may be hand holders that come into the market that want to ease the process of, and so take a little cut here, a little cut there, and blah, 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 or whatnot. Right. And I think that's, that will probably happen. But I think we're going to get back. I personally think we're going to get back to 70 to 80% of the value that we are currently creating on the internet. And there's also going to be new stuff that's really cool to consider, like uploading your genome and getting paid for researchers to access your genome.
Right.
Sharing your being part of a data trust, right, with a group of 1,000 other people, where you're gonna, or a million other people, where you say, we're all each a part of this data trust, and we're gonna broker our data together, and we are gonna get paid.
Right.
Because data massified is more valuable typically than in just one or two.
And also, in the context of a data trust, I guess you can also minimize the risk of de-anonymization potentially. If you're, because
exactly,
aggregated and anonymized these days actually doesn't mean as much as it doesn't mean what it used to mean, right? And if you can somehow control the aggregation and anonymization, because the metadata is what's really valuable. But if you can actually, aggregate and then not allow that metadata to leak, which is where the real value is, but to control who's accessing it, I think that's enormously valuable. We actually had a podcast with Thorsten Dittmars from Poly, and they have a cooperative, a data cooperative, and it's all based on phones. And what's interesting, what they did is they actually have the calculations done by the phone. So they found a way to sort of insert this other economic component into the model that makes it intriguing for the companies, because the companies will be like, yeah, why am I paying it for this person? But when you aggregate all these mobile phones, all these personal devices that are also processing it and providing it to them, it's suddenly the numbers start to make more sense. I thought that's sort of a brilliant take, because one of the things we always talk about is, if I'm a 15-year-old that just goes on and checks out K-pop all day or whatever it is, I'm like, my value, I don't care. Right, here's all my data. I'm just loving the fact that I can see K-pop and my favorite bands and all this other stuff. Whereas, you and I, we don't really, the value we place on that information not getting out is a lot higher. And so there's, right. And so they're not equal. And then there's also the 15-year-old girl or boy who then goes to college, gets out of college, and now doesn't want all those permissions that they granted for the last 10 years to follow them, because suddenly it starts to mean a lot more to them. So there's a transitional component. And I think that's a very interesting, that's a very interesting space to navigate those differing needs across different stages. because again, people like if people say, oh, we'll pay you for your data. Well, I hope you can't pay me enough for my data because you're not going to want to pay me enough for my data. There's like, I'd rather have my privacy, and my value of my privacy is probably a lot more than what you would value learning that data about me to be. Whereas for the 15-year-olds, just like, hey, I'm picking on 15-year-olds, I'll pick on 14, whatever, 16. It's just like, I just want to see K-pop. Like, I don't care. Like, if I can go to a concert, whatever it is, like, fine, take it. Like, I just, give me more. So very different needs. And I think navigating that spectrum of privacy expectations, that's a market opportunity. That's a Web3 market opportunity, but, it has to be addressed. So.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that really highlights the the importance of human psychology and social psychology in all of this, right? Where do I care? And it's like, maybe I don't care.
Yeah.
So we have to, right? And
like the hedge fund manager who like got all his very sensitive information eaten up. He didn't care up until that moment that he heard the crunching. So he actually did care, mm-hmm. but it was willful blindness, willful ignorance. Like, everybody's so busy. I'm sure both you and I, there are things we could do this second, mm-hmm. to make ourselves more secure. That it's just like on our to-do list, we have to do it, but yet it's like 10 things down, for an ever rotating list.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think we tend to care when we feel that we are missing out or losing out on something, right? And in the case of, if you have a breach or something, right, you feel that loss very, very dramatically. But our sort of bet is that once the first stories start coming out of, in the media, of people deriving, significant personal capitalizations as a result of taking part in these networks and ecosystems and utilizing, things like decentralized identifiers in concert with, a Web3 experience. Once the first stories start coming out in the media of people getting these sort of, significant personal capitalizations as a result of taking part in these new networks and ecosystems that utilize decentralized identifiers or DIDs and are in the context of Web3. I think that the change in mindset for many people will be pretty rapid and like viral, right? Because, even, and especially for young people, because they're going to start to think about, they're going to start to think, well, if I don't get very conscious about my data journey, even starting from a very intro like data journey where I'm listening to K-pop and who cares? Like, they're still thinking, like, I'm building eventually, I'm building a legacy, right? And of, and I need to be protective about it to some extent. I need to be conscious about it. I'm going to get on this Web3 platform and create, a DID and have it. And because I know that my friend did this, and over the past year, every time researchers accessed, their uploaded genome in some secure way, that each access of that was, they got $50 into their crypto wallet, right? Like, and over the course of a year, they accessed it 5 times, and now, Billy's got $250 and he's taking me out to, he's taking me out to, I don't know, whatever, to to bubble tea. Right. And like, so it'll happen quickly is my supposition, and the supposition of people building in this space. And I think it'll happen quickly. I think that will be the needed impetus for it to happen, which is a perceived loss if I don't do it.
Or FOMO.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm pulling out one sort of more lucrative example of a personal like level of data sharing or through this genomic example. But there's going to be these really all these different ways to leverage your identity and what you have composing your identity, right?
Yeah, we did an episode on genomic NFTs in Mexico for the indigenous peoples population, because the genomic pool is just, it's very rich, but there's no effort to bring it all together, and also the communities can be kind of more tribal, driven by certain leaders. So like, it's really intriguing. Like this group has gone in and created these repositories for genomic information that are translated into NFTs. And so they take their genome and they put it into an NFT. And the idea is that then they can get paid, much like the data trust, for that, providing that genomic research. So it's just, there's so many different ways that this could be utilized, right? Like your genomic information could be part of your DID, or something that an NFT that you associate with your DID, and then you choose when you want to, share it or put it in a data trust, more likely. So yeah, definitely interesting stuff. Anything that I didn't touch on that maybe we should have chatted about more today?
No, I mean, we hit all the good points, and even provided, some good insights too. So yeah, I'm good. I'm good on my end.
All right. Well, great. Listen, it was awesome having you on. This was a great conversation. Thanks so much for coming on.
Likewise, it was totally my pleasure. Thank you.